What if the most precious thing you own is gathering dust under your bed, right when the world has forgotten your name? Late evening, Chicago. The rain outside looked like 100,000 pins pricking the glass of Trattoria Angelico, that old Italian joint sandwiched between a pawn shop and a laundromat on Division Street. The smell inside, a confusing, heady mix of burnt espresso, garlic, and bleach, clung to Samantha Reed like a uniform. Her apron, faded navy, had lost its shape long ago. Each night she tied it tight around her waist, as if to hold the pieces of her life together. Samantha's hands moved on autopilot, collecting empty bread baskets, wiping rings of Chianti from cheap tabletops, dodging the hiss of the kitchen door. Yet, her mind drifted, always, toward music. There was a time not so long ago when her name appeared on the program at Carnegie Hall, just 12 years old. Violin tucked under her chin, stage lights warm on her cheek. But that was before the accident, before her parents' faces turned to photos on the mantel, before the world pressed her flat. Now, at 27, Samantha's stage was this restaurant, the only audience, hungry, distracted, sometimes rude. Her manager, Sal, barked orders like a broken metronome. "Faster, Reed! Table 7's waiting!" The clang of silverware, the neon open sign flickering above the entry. This was her symphony now. Sometimes between orders, Samantha would glance at the yellowed sheet music stuffed inside her pocket, or trace invisible notes onto napkins, hoping the rhythm of memory might break the monotony. Most nights, the music inside her head was drowned out by the sounds of real life. Customers snapping fingers, the dishwasher's relentless rumble, Ethan's voice, her little brother, 16, at home, waiting, always waiting for her to return. Samantha's violin, once her lifeline, now slept beneath her bed in its battered case, strings slack with neglect, a relic she was almost afraid to touch. Her childhood dream felt as distant as the city skyline glimpsed from the restaurant's back alley, shimmering and untouchable. But that night, something changed. Near closing, a stranger appeared. He wore a black wool coat, collar turned up against the wind, silver at his temples, and a look in his eyes that said he'd spent too many years solving problems money couldn't fix. He chose the corner booth, barely glancing at the menu, instead surveying the room with a kind of weary sharpness, the kind of gaze that made people straighten up or shrink away. Samantha felt his attention before she saw it. When she brought his coffee, hands steady despite the ache in her wrists, he met her eyes, really met them for a long moment, as if searching for something familiar. There was nothing special about her, nothing anyone would notice, not unless they looked twice. Her ponytail was messy, her sneakers scuffed, her eyes carrying the sleepless shimmer of a girl who'd learned to survive. Still, the man in the corner watched her the way a conductor studies a silent orchestra, waiting for the first note to rise. As the clock crept toward midnight, the dining room thinned. Rain hammered harder. Samantha tried to push the stranger from her thoughts, but he lingered, like an unresolved chord. When she finally gathered the last plate from his table, he spoke, his voice a low murmur edged with curiosity. "Long shift tonight?" Samantha blinked. "They're all long." He almost smiled. Sometimes the longest nights hide the brightest music. The words meant nothing, or maybe everything. She retreated to the back, heart pounding, the old ache of longing blooming again inside her chest. On her way out, Samantha cast one last glance toward the man in the corner. His gaze followed her, thoughtful, searching. She didn't know it yet, but the first note of her forgotten song was about to play. How much pressure can one smile hide? The next morning arrived gray and flat. The smell of burnt coffee greeted Samantha as she stepped into the staff entrance, shoes squeaking on cracked linoleum. Her uniform hung from a rusted locker, navy polyester, a little stiffer after every wash. The Trattoria Angelico logo barely visible on the chest. Sal, the manager, was waiting by the clock-in machine, arms folded. "Reed, you're covering Amy's shift tonight. And don't forget, tables 6 and 9 have that allergy, so if you mess up, it's on you." Samantha nodded, swallowing the retort, burning her tongue. There was no room for mistakes. Not here, not now. The restaurant buzzed, waitresses darting past with trays, the hiss of steam from the kitchen, the sour scent of floor cleaner fighting last night's garlic. At break, she slipped into the alley for a breath of fresh air, the metallic bite of the dumpster mixed with the sweetness of rain on concrete. Samantha leaned against the brick, pulled a crumpled napkin from her pocket, and started sketching music notes. Small things. An unfinished melody. A phrase she'd heard in a dream. It was the only space she owned. Her phone buzzed, a message from Ethan. "Coach says I can't play without a glove. Don't worry about it." Samantha stared at the screen. Ethan, 16, baseball mad, always pretending not to mind the hand-me-downs and the gaps. She texted back, "I'll figure something out. Promise." Back inside, a party of 4 in crisp business suits snapped their fingers for service. "Miss, do you even listen?" One scoffed as she refilled their water, a hint of mockery curling his lips. Samantha forced a laugh. Another hour, another battle. By noon, her arms ached from trays stacked too high, but her smile never slipped. Not when Sal rolled his eyes at a spilled soup, not when a child threw pasta on her shoes, not even when tips shrank to a few wrinkled bills. The world saw only a pleasant waitress, never the invisible burdens pressing into her bones. Through the bustle, she caught a glimpse of last night's guest, Michael Donovan, sitting in the corner again, this time alone with a notepad and a cup of black coffee. He didn't say a word, just watched, quiet, eyes shadowed with something almost like recognition. Samantha's mind wandered. What did a billionaire see in this tired place? In her? But there was no time to wonder. Sal barked, "Reed! Booth 3! Move!" As the afternoon faded, Samantha tucked another napkin with music scribbles into her apron, heart aching for her violin, for the days when music was her armor instead of her secret. Her shoes squeaked down the sticky tile, past Michael Donovan, whose gaze felt both heavy and hopeful. She didn't know it yet, but she was being watched for a reason. What does it feel like to have your secret self noticed by a stranger? Evening had sunk its teeth into Chicago, dragging a cold wind through the city. Inside Trattoria Angelico, the lighting softened, golden and forgiving, hiding the grime in corners and softening faces in the glass. Samantha wiped down the bar, her fingers stained with old marinara, humming softly, a melody that only belonged to her. Michael Donovan was back, his presence impossible to ignore. He lingered at the corner booth, gray eyes sharp as glass, his phone untouched beside his plate. Some guests came for the food. Michael seemed to come for the silence between the notes of her song. Sal's voice grated from the kitchen. "Reed, table 5, snap to it." Samantha grabbed her tray, moving through the maze of tables, the scrape of chairs, the clink of forks, the low hum of tired conversation, all of it blurred until Michael spoke. "Have you ever performed in front of a crowd?" His voice was gentle, almost apologetic, as if afraid to break her spell. Samantha's cheeks warmed. She shook her head, her answer half a lie, half a shield. "No, not really." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, gaze unwavering. "You're wasting your gift in here. I'll make you a deal. Play something tonight, for this room, and I'll tip you 10 times more than anyone else." The words hung between them, daring and impossible. Samantha's heart pounded. A warning, or maybe a dare. Sal caught the exchange and rolled his eyes. "If she wants to embarrass herself, let her," he muttered. Samantha hesitated. The old anxiety crept in. Her violin hadn't seen daylight in years. Her hands might fail her, her memory betray her. But then she noticed something. Mounted on the restaurant's wall, above an old photo of Little Italy, hung a violin. Its varnish was worn, strings sagging, but the shape was unmistakable. It looked exactly like hers. Her fingers itched. Maybe the universe was calling her bluff. Michael's gaze followed hers. "Play that one, if it still sings." Samantha's breath hitched. She moved to the wall, the chatter in the room fading to white noise. The wood was cool beneath her fingers, the bow rough with age. For a second, she just stood there, heart ricocheting against her ribs, a waitress in a cheap uniform, a billionaire in a wrinkled suit, a violin on a dusty wall. None of it made sense, and that was the only reason it felt real. She tucked the violin under her chin, eyes closed. The first note wobbled, then found its footing, spinning a thin silver thread through the garlic-scented air. People stopped mid-conversation. Michael set down his glass, transfixed. Samantha's song was hesitant at first, then braver, her childhood leaking through the cracks of the present. As she played, time blurred. For a moment she was 12 again, the world huge and full of promise, her parents waiting in the wings. The last note trembled and died. For a second, there was silence. Then someone clapped. Another followed. The applause grew, filling the small restaurant, washing over her like forgiveness. Samantha set the violin down, hands shaking. When she looked up, Michael's eyes were shining with something she didn't have a name for. This was no ordinary night, and it wasn't over yet. What happens in a room when the impossible becomes real, if only for a moment? The restaurant owner, Mr. Bellini, shuffled out from the kitchen, his apron dusted with flour, eyebrows raised in surprise. "Didn't know you could play like that, Sam," he murmured, voice thick with old country pride. He glanced at the violin, then at Michael Donovan, whose expression flickered with something between awe and longing. The violin still trembled in Samantha's hands. She stood, breathless, the music hanging in the air like the scent of rosemary and old memories. Her fingers tingled with adrenaline, a feeling she hadn't known since childhood, when applause meant more than money. For a heartbeat, the restaurant was transformed. Conversations paused, forks frozen mid-air. Even Sal, too, so often gruff and unimpressed, stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The room held its breath, wrapped in the fragile hush after a miracle. Michael leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes glinting beneath the soft lamplight. "That's not just talent. That's a story you need to tell," he said, voice low but urgent. Samantha felt a heat rush to her face. She wanted to vanish, to hide this part of herself. But Michael's words echoed. the promise of more than just a tip, the hint of an open door. Bellini gave a nod and slipped her a gentle smile. That old violin's been on the wall for years. Guess it was just waiting for you. There was something tender in his tone, a rare softness in a world built on grit. As the spell broke, a handful of guests wiped their eyes. The chatter returned, quieter now, reverent. Someone at table 7 whispered, "I've never heard anything like that," as if the music had shifted the shape of the room itself. Samantha placed the violin back on its hooks, heart pounding, hands shaky but alive. She caught Michael watching her, not with the hunger of a collector, but with the careful attention of someone who knew what it meant to lose and to rediscover a gift. He slid a business card across the table. "You shouldn't be hidden here. Have you ever wanted a real chance?" The question sent a tremor down her spine. Ethan's future, her dreams, all tangled up in a possibility she hadn't dared imagine. Sal grumbled something under his breath, but Bellini shushed him. "Let her think," he said quietly, eyes still kind. Samantha turned Michael's card over in her hand, the letters blurring as her mind raced. She remembered her father's words from long ago. Music will always find you, even when you're lost. For the first time in years, the world felt wide open. As the crowd slowly left, the clatter and chaos returned. But now there was a new current running through the space, a kind of hope you could almost smell, like the first breath after rain. Samantha tucked the card into her apron, pulse skipping. Michael lingered by the door. "If you want to change your life, meet me tomorrow. You decide." She watched him disappear into the drizzle, the night suddenly alive with promise. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing. Her story wasn't over. How does it feel to walk into a world you've only ever glimpsed from the sidewalk? The next afternoon, Samantha stood with Ethan in front of the Grand Mariner Hotel, its brass doors gleaming, bellboys moving like chess pieces in crisp uniforms. Ethan's thrift store jeans and fraying backpack looked painfully out of place. Samantha straightened his collar, nerves jangling under her skin. Inside, everything was polished marble and soft light, the kind of place that never smelled like burnt coffee or bleach. Michael Donovan greeted them in the penthouse suite, sleeves rolled up, more relaxed, but somehow more intimidating in this element. A handful of his closest friends and business partners lounged on velvet sofas, their laughter brittle and smooth. Samantha's palms sweated as she stepped to the center of the room, Ethan gripping her hand tight. Michael introduced her with a simple nod. "This is Samantha Reed. She has a story to tell you. All you have to do is listen." The hush that fell over the room wasn't like the restaurant's clatter. It was expectant, heavy. Samantha drew in a breath, the borrowed violin warm beneath her chin. Her first notes trembled, but the melody grew, curling through the suite, brushing against high ceilings and hushed hearts. She chose a piece from her childhood, something bright, hopeful, fierce as the Chicago wind. When she finished, the applause was genuine. Even the skeptical faces softened. One woman, draped in designer silk, dabbed at her eyes. Another guest leaned over to Michael, whispering, "She needs to be at the gala." Ethan's eyes were wide as saucers. "You were amazing, Sam," he whispered, voice cracking with awe and pride. Michael nodded, a rare, genuine smile on his lips. "How would you like to perform at my charity gala next week? Both of you, my guests." Samantha nearly dropped the violin. She glanced at Ethan, whose face lit up with the kind of hope she hadn't seen since their parents died. The walls she'd built to survive, the ones made of exhaustion and routine, shuddered. She wanted to say no, to stay safe, to keep her head down. But Ethan squeezed her hand, and for the first time in a long time, Samantha let herself want something bigger. Michael handed her an envelope. Just a small advance. Get what you need. Dress code's a little different than Angelico's. Samantha felt out of place, awkward in a world that seemed designed to keep people like her out. But that night, as she lay awake, Ethan asleep beside her, she traced the edge of the invitation, pulse racing with possibility. The music had opened a door. Whether she could walk through it, that was another story. What happens when you finally get your shot, and nothing goes as planned? The Lake Michigan estate gleamed under a sky streaked with gold and purple, the kind of place that only existed in postcards. Samantha and Ethan walked up the steps together, Ethan's new glove peeking from his jacket pocket, a gift from Michael, who'd noticed more than most. Inside, chandeliers cast starbursts on polished floors, and the air was thick with perfume, caviar, and the hush of money. Waiters moved like shadows, balancing trays of champagne, as Chicago's richest gathered in clusters, eyes bright and cold. Samantha tried to disappear behind a potted fern, clutching the old restaurant violin. Her new thrift shop dress felt like a costume, the borrowed heels pinched, but Ethan squeezed her hand. "You can do this, Sam," he whispered, his voice steady despite the tremor in his fingers. Michael greeted them at the entrance. "Glad you made it. Don't let them scare you. Tonight's about the music, not the money." But almost immediately, trouble found her. During cocktail hour, a renowned music critic, a thin man with sharp spectacles and a sharper tongue, leaned in, voice slick with condescension. "Miss Reed, I hear you're to perform. What repertoire? And, with that instrument?" A flush crept up Samantha's neck. She glanced down at the violin, its worn body a glaring contrast to the glimmer of diamonds in the room. "It's all I have," she managed. He sniffed, unimpressed. "Let's hope your playing's better than your taste in wood." The announcement came quickly. Lights dimmed, and a hush fell. Samantha stepped onto the small stage, heart thundering as 100 elite eyes pinned her in place. Her first note wavered, catching on nerves. She heard whispers, disdainful, impatient. For a moment, she nearly faltered. She remembered her father's words, spoken late at night. "Music isn't about technique. It's about heart." Closing her eyes, Samantha let the critic's voice fade. She began again, not with a showpiece, but with a simple American folk song, a tune her parents used to sing while driving back from Little League games, something raw and pure, belonging to everyone and no one. The sound floated out, tender and true. In that moment, the chandelier's sparkle meant nothing. All that mattered was the way the melody lifted, brushing away the walls that separated her world from theirs. As the final note faded, the critic sat stunned, his pen hovering useless above his notepad. The room didn't quite know what to do. A few scattered claps broke the spell, then faded as quickly as they came. Some guests frowned, unimpressed by her choice, but others looked quietly moved. Samantha bowed, her hands no longer trembling. She had played for herself, for Ethan, for anyone who ever felt small in a world built for giants. In the corner, Michael's eyes shone with pride. She'd survived the first trial. But she knew harder tests were still to come. What if every room you enter is a reminder of where you don't belong? Samantha left the stage to a scatter of polite applause. Some genuine, most reluctant. A knot of women in pearls and silk whispered behind manicured hands. "She's just a waitress, isn't she?" one murmured. "Michael's charity cases get bolder every year," another replied, the words slicing through the air. The critic scribbled something in his notebook, lips pursed. A gray-haired board member turned to Michael, voice heavy with disapproval. "You're sentimental, Donovan. Don't mistake sympathy for talent." Michael's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, his presence silencing a dozen small conversations. "Talent doesn't ask for permission," he said, eyes flashing. "You heard what I heard. Heart, honesty. Not everyone's born with a silver spoon or a Stradivarius." His words hung in the air, daring anyone to argue. The crowd shifted, uneasy, but not convinced. Some smiled, more out of politeness than belief. Samantha felt her ears burn. She shrank against the marble wall, clutching her violin like a shield. Ethan pushed through the crowd, eyes wide and loyal. "Don't let them get to you, Sam," he whispered fiercely. "You played for real. That's more than most of them ever did." But the weight of judgment pressed in. She remembered every late night at Trattoria Angelico, every rude customer, every time Sal barked at her to work harder, move faster, stay invisible. In this glittering world, her calluses and thrift shop dress felt like crimes. She drifted toward the doors, the echo of laughter chasing her down the hall. Maybe she'd been foolish to hope. Maybe the only thing the rich liked about her was the story she brought to their party, a dash of inspiration before they returned to their comfort. As she reached the foyer, Michael caught up with her, eyes troubled but determined. "You don't owe them anything, Samantha. What you have, it's rare. Don't let them shame you into silence." Samantha's grip on the violin tightened. Doubt and defiance wrestled inside her. Should she disappear again, blend into the background, or stand her ground? Just then, Ethan stepped in front of her, chin raised. "You changed something tonight, Sam. For me. Maybe for them too, even if they don't show it." Samantha stared at her brother, at Michael, at the blurred lights beyond the window. All her life she'd tried to survive by making herself small. But survival wasn't living. Not anymore. The crowd had already moved on, searching for new distractions. But Samantha stood frozen, right on the threshold between two worlds. Would she walk away or fight back? What if your biggest risk is the only thing that can save you? The gala had thinned. Waiters swept away empty glasses, the hush of late night settling like velvet across the marble. Samantha lingered at the edge of the room, her heart torn between humiliation and defiance. Ethan hovered close, a silent guardian. Michael approached, his expression carved with conviction. "They want to see a miracle, Samantha. So give them one." He gestured to an ornate case on a side table. A Stradivarius, legendary even to those who knew nothing of music. "It's yours tonight. Show them what's real." The violin was impossibly light in her hands, its polished wood warm from 100 years of song. The weight of history pressed down, but for the first time, it felt like a blessing, not a burden. Samantha closed her eyes and breathed in. She thought of her parents, her brother, Chicago's sharp winter, garlic on her hands, Ethan's hopeful face, all the broken pieces, gathered and fused into one clear purpose. She stepped back onto the stage, alone, exposed, but fearless now. Conversations stilled. The critic looked up, skeptical. Michael watched, arms folded, his whole body tense with hope. Instead of a classic, Samantha chose a melody she'd composed at 15, a piece that married the discipline of Bach with the wildness of country roads and summer baseball games. The notes tumbled out, raw and bold, weaving childhood memories and hard-won dreams into a tapestry no one else could have played. The first bars stung, sharp as truth. Then, as she found her footing, the sound swelled, bittersweet, bright, stubbornly American. Faces softened. A few guests leaned in, eyes wide. One by one, the crowd surrendered to the music. The critic's pen slipped from his hand, forgotten. A woman in a pearl choker wept openly. Michael's closest friend set down his champagne, watching as if seeing color for the first time. Cell phones rose, cameras blinking, eager to capture the miracle as it happened. Ethan, on the edge of the crowd, mouthed every phrase, his hero, his sister, his future. Samantha played until her arms ached, until the pain and doubt burned away, leaving only music and light. When she finished, silence reigned, a full, breathless beat, then the room exploded in applause. No polite clapping now. This was thunder. This was surrender. Michael's eyes shone, not with pride, but with awe. "That," he whispered, barely audible, "is what money can't buy." As Samantha stepped down, cameras followed her every move. A guest live-streamed the moment. By midnight, the video would begin circling the globe, strangers gasping at the waitress who broke the rules and stole the night. She handed the Stradivarius back to Michael, her hands steady, her eyes fierce. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me fight my way through." Michael smiled, a true grateful smile. "You did more than fight. You won." And somewhere, out in the city, doors she'd never dared to touch were about to swing open. How does it feel when the world that once ignored you suddenly can't look away? By morning, Samantha's phone buzzed nonstop, notifications piling up, strangers from all over the country sharing the video, leaving messages of encouragement and awe. Even the regulars at Trattoria Angelico watched her now, with wide, admiring eyes. For the first time in years, Samantha felt visible. Ethan couldn't stop grinning. He waved his new baseball glove in the kitchen, proud as a champion. "You're famous, Sam. Coach even put me in the lineup. Said we're lucky to have a Reed on the team." His voice quivered with a happiness she hadn't heard since they were children. Michael called mid-morning. "You have a visitor," he said, voice warm, conspiratorial. "You'd better be ready for good news." An hour later, a woman in a tailored suit arrived at the restaurant, a professor from the Chicago Music Conservatory. She carried herself with purpose, the air of someone who'd seen prodigies bloom and wilt. "Samantha Reed?" she asked, extending a hand. "We saw your performance. We'd be honored to offer you a full scholarship. Tuition, housing, everything. The city needs to hear you play." Samantha's world tilted. Tears prickled at her eyes. All the late nights, all the dreams left for dead, suddenly returned. Bright, insistent, unstoppable. The surprises didn't end there. That afternoon, a package arrived for Ethan, a brand new set of baseball gear, the note inside reading simply, "Never stop swinging for the fences, MD." Ethan's face lit up with a kind of gratitude and pride only a little brother could understand. For Michael, the reward was subtler but no less profound. He found himself spending less time in boardrooms, and more time among musicians, artists, and children with wild, impossible dreams. There was a joy in patronage, in seeing hope spark in someone else's eyes. A month later, Samantha took the stage at the Chicago Symphony Center. The lights were blinding, but she wasn't alone. Ethan, in a borrowed suit, cheered from the front row. Michael sat beside the professor, beaming. The conductor nodded, and Samantha raised her bow. Her solo soared, full of sorrow and sunlight, memory and defiance. The audience rose in thunderous applause. Some moved to tears. As she bowed, Samantha caught her reflection in the lacquer of her violin. A waitress, a survivor, a musician reborn. That night, standing under the vast Chicago sky, Samantha looked up at the swirling stars. She whispered, almost to herself, "Mom, Dad, I'm back. I found my way home." Her story, once faded and nearly forgotten, glowed now, alive, undeniable, unstoppable. What do you carry with you after the applause fades? Life settled into a new rhythm, both familiar and changed. Samantha still worked part-time shifts at Trattoria Angelico, the smell of burnt espresso and garlic, a steady background to her days. She served regulars with her same gentle smile, only now people looked at her with a glimmer of recognition, a little awe mixed with warmth. Some nights, after closing, Samantha would pull her old violin from beneath her bed, its case now free of dust. She played by the window, the city's lights flickering in time with her music, the shadows in her apartment growing softer with every note. Ethan would listen from the kitchen table, finishing homework or tossing a baseball in the air. His world opened by her courage. At the conservatory, Samantha was surrounded by talent, students who'd never tasted struggle, and others who had fought just as hard as she had. She helped those who were lost, just as others had helped her. The teachers, too, noticed her humility, her hunger, her ability to draw emotion from wood and string. Michael remained a steady presence in her life, not as a savior, but as a friend and mentor. He still attended her performances, but he'd also found purpose in supporting young musicians from every walk of life. The mansion on Lake Michigan, once lonely, now echoed with laughter and music, the echo of hope bouncing off marble and glass. Samantha's story spread, not just through viral videos or standing ovations, but through small acts, a hand squeezed before a big test, a gentle word to a struggling classmate, a quiet performance at a children's hospital. People began to say that her greatest gift wasn't her playing, but her kindness. One autumn evening, as leaves spiraled across the sidewalk and the city turned gold with twilight, Samantha paused outside Trattoria Angelico. She looked in through the window, the familiar tables, Sal's grumpy face, the warmth of the old lights. For a moment, she remembered the girl who'd scrubbed floors, who'd nearly let her music die. She smiled to herself, certain now of one thing. True worth isn't measured by applause, dollars, or even dreams fulfilled. It's measured in the courage to rise again, and in the kindness we show each other along the way. As she stepped into the glow of the restaurant, violin case in hand, a customer called, "Play us something, Sam." She laughed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, her eyes bright with mischief and gratitude. The world might be hard, but it was also wide and full of music, if you dared to listen, Ma. If you believe a single act of kindness can change a life, like, comment, and subscribe to share this story.